Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the SET facility at AIIMS. I am Dr. Tushar Agarwal. I'm working as Professor of Ophthalmology in the Cataract, Cornea and Refractive Surgery Unit of RP Center AIIMS. Now I shall be talking about step-by-step phacoemulsification here today. Now, about 5 years back, I started conducting video reviews for residents, primarily consisting of their own surgical videos. And it is during this process that I myself learned how to teach and convey the essence of surgery to the residents. And this is what I'm going to be sharing here today. I'd like to first give a brief introduction as to the method which I'll be adopting here to teach phacoemulsification. Now, when a resident first enters the ophthalmic OT and observes experienced surgeons operating, essentially what the resident is seeing is like a musician who's playing an instrument fluently. And then when the resident gets their own case, they try to replicate the same thing in the OT, which normally doesn't happen in the initial period. So how do you teach someone to play an instrument? You break down the tune into very small parts, and then you break down each part into various notes of the tune. And this is the method which I adopt to teach surgery, including phacoemulsification. So what you do is you deconstruct the surgery into discrete steps and then ruthlessly subdivide each step into small actionable sub-steps. In effect, these small steps become like notes of that tune. And then you teach each of these notes or the sub-steps to the resident. So the chances of anything going wrong or errors become very less as long as the person is following the instruction. It's critical in this method that one has to record their own surgical videos and then focus on each step and sub-step methodically and then compare them each to that done by experienced surgeons and then identify their own mistakes and then try to improve them. Now, the foundation of any surgery is observing experienced surgeons operating, but your true learning and improvement will come only when you learn to recognize your own errors, your own performance, and then try to improve it from there. Now, for the purpose of this surgery, I divide phacoemulsification into these steps: incisions, capsulorhexis, hydro procedures, nucleotomy techniques, cortical aspiration, IOL implantation, and finally incision closure. Normally, when I teach this in RP Center, it takes me around an hour to 2 hours to go through each step individually, depending on the type of step. For example, the smaller steps like incisions and IOL implantation take less than an hour, but things like nucleotomy and capsulorhexis take much longer. So what I've tried to do is I've condensed the entire course into less than 1 hour, and I'll be highlighting the key steps, key sub-steps under each step, which would give something for everyone here today. Now let's begin with incisions. Now there are two things which I'll be showing here. Normally everyone is doing 2.2 millimeters or 2.8 millimeter surgery these days, and this includes 3 ports. One is the main port, that is the 2.2 or the 2.8 millimeters, and then 1 or 2 side ports. So the first thing to note is that you have to visualize the instrument which is going to be used through a port. So for example, in the main port, you're going to be introducing the phaco needle at most times. So if you construct this incision keeping in mind the direction of the phaco needle which is going to be advanced through the cornea, what you will get is an incision which will allow for an unhindered passage of the phaco needle every time. What this does is it causes the least amount of force or pressure on the sleeve, which keeps the fluid going in and keeps the anterior chamber stable. And secondly, it leads to the least amount of distortion on the wound itself, which allows you to leave it sutureless after the surgery. The second thing to note is the counter pressure which has to be applied on the opposing end of the incision. So you need something like a LEMS forceps, not to grab the conjunctiva, but to just apply counter pressure on the opposite side of the blade. And as you advance the blade into the cornea, you keep releasing the pressure. So this does two things. It gives you some counter pressure on the cornea to make the incision. And secondly, it prevents the rotation of the globe. So the incision will get created in the exact direction as you intended to be. Having constructed the main port, we move on to the side port. Now, again, as I said, you have to remember that you have to imagine the instrument which is going to be passing through each port. So in the case of the left side port for a right-handed surgeon, the main instrument which is going to be going through this port is the chopper. So your intended direction of this incision should be as if you're trying to insert the chopper into the eye. The other thing is that more than the incision itself, it is the orientation of this incision with respect to the main incision. Now this needs to be somewhere around 3 clock hours from the center of the first port. Anything which is closer to the main port, you will have very less horizontal play here for the chopper to move, and if anything is beyond this, it will become infructuous as far as chopping goes. So you have to focus on the distance of this side port from the center of the main port, which needs to be around 3 clock hours. I also make a second side port these days. Now the second side port for me is primarily for injecting intracameral antibiotics at the end of the surgery, and sometimes for the adjustment of the IOL position, especially in cases of toric lenses. So for this side port, it doesn't matter, the relative orientation with the main port doesn't matter. My direction is as if I'm trying to inject something into the eye, so it goes straight radially into the eye downwards. So that's about the incisions. Following the incisions, we move to capsular excess. Now this is the central circular opening made in the anterior capsule and is one of the imperative steps for proceeding for phacoemulsification. What are we looking for? We are looking for an opening which is circular and central. We want a 0.5 millimeter overlap all around the optic without leaving any skip areas on the optic of the lens. What this does is it keeps the lens stable and is also known to prevent PCO. One has to be careful that the margins while ending the rhexis have to come from outside to in, because if you make it from in to out, you can leave an area of weakness which can split, especially during hydro procedures. Now there has always been a debate whether to use a rhexis forceps or a capsulotomy needle to do this step. Now there are relative merits and demerits to both the instruments. Needle can be used through a side port. It allows for a better anterior chamber maintenance as the main port is not distorted. So you can use a viscoelastic like methyl cellulose to do the same. In contrast, forceps need to be used through the main port, so you need a high viscosity OVD. However, you'll find that the control over the capsule is always less with the needle as compared to the forceps. And if you ever land in a situation where there is an errant capsular excess, you always have to shift to a forceps to manage it. So my recommendation is that one should always use a capsular excess forceps to begin with while performing rhexis. Of course, you do need a needle to begin the rhexis, but the first step is to stain it with the anterior capsule with trypan blue. Now, in the early 2000s, when trypan blue was first introduced, it was the primary indication was for staining and visualization of capsule in white cataracts. However, soon people realized that there are other advantages than just doing the rhexis. If you stain your capsule well with trypan blue, then not only does the capsular flap gets visualized better during rhexis, but also when you are, it helps you in identifying the margin when you are chopping the nucleus. It prevents inadvertent cutting of the capsular excess edge with the chopper. Also, after you implant the IOL, you can visualize the capsular edge very nicely. So the recommendation is that, especially in the learning curve, capsule should be stained in all cases, even if there is good retro illumination. So a couple of pointers in this. The staining is done under air. Now there were initial concerns about the effect of trypan blue dye on the endothelium, but now that we have DMEC going, and as corneal surgeons, we actually soak the DMEC lenticule for a minute or even more in trypan blue. So I don't think that is any longer an issue. The air, in fact, is mostly to keep the dye pressed against the anterior capsule. So you inject some dye in the anterior chamber below the air, and then use BSS to wash off the dye. Now, the next step is to put viscoelastic in the anterior chamber. Here I'd like to say that you have to advance the cannula beyond the air bubble and then start injecting the viscoelastic. If you do that, you'll find that the bubble will come out instead of being pushed into the periphery of the anterior chamber. So always advance the cannula beyond the extent of the air bubble and then start to inject the OVD and start to retract your cannula as the OVD goes in and the air comes out. If you do this, you will never have air which gets trapped in the periphery of the anterior chamber. If you do get bubbles here, you'll find that once you start to do the rexes, these bubbles tend to come in the center. So it's always good to have an anterior chamber which is completely filled with OVD and devoid of any air. Now, the first sub-step in creation of a rexis is the creation of a capsular flap. You do need a capsulotomy needle to effectively create this. Now let's see this in real time, how this is done. You advance the needle onto the anterior capsule and then create the flap. Now for the trainee, this looks like one single step and you see that the flap forms, but when I see the videos of the residents, this doesn't happen like this. So for this I have slowed down the video by 4 times, and we'll see in slow motion that this small movement actually is composed of 4 different sub movements which one has to learn, and they have to be done in the same order. Now let's see these 4 movements. The first is that you reach the center of the capsule and then use the pointed tip of the capsulotomy needle to create a puncture in the anterior capsule. You are using just the tip of the needle. Once you create that initial puncture, you advance the capsulotomy needle sideways and use the side of the bevel, the bevel of the needle, to actually cut the capsule sideways. So in this movement, you are not pulling on the capsule, you are cutting on the capsule. Until what point do you cut? You keep cutting till you have just reached the intended radius of the rexis. So these are 2 movements. Now what is the third movement? Then you pull on the, so you have created an initial nick, you have created a cut. Now you pull. You are not cutting now, you are pulling on the cut edge. When you pull on the cut edge, that's where you create the flap. And then there is a 4th movement which I said, which is there. You go back to the cut edge from where you started and give a pull here also. So what you create is a relaxing tear. So this relaxing tear is important while you're doing rexis, because if it is not there, the rexis will tend to pivot around this untorn edge and become smaller and smaller as you progress along the rexis. So you have 4 movements: the initial nick, the cut, the pull to create the tear, and a relaxing tear. Now again, we'll see it in real time. So just to so now the flap has been created. Then you introduce your rexis forceps. Make sure you have a good forceps which is light and which has relatively blunt ends, because the rexis forceps which come with the sharp ends tend to cut through the capsule. Now the trick here is to have a good grasp. If you feel that the grasp is not good enough, re-grasp it till the time that you have a very good grasp on the capsule, and then you start to create a tear all along. Now what you have to observe is that you see that there is a gap here between the edge of the capsule, the edge of the tear, and the pupillary margin. Your idea should be to keep this margin constant and just follow the pupillary margin as a guide. So you have a good grasp and just keep tracing out the pupillary margin as a guide. So what this does is it gives you a central rhexis, it will give you a round rhexis, it will give you a rhexis which is nicely placed. And every time you leave the flap, you leave it in the center. So what you want is that you want a edge which is absolutely free of wrinkles. All the wrinkles can be left in the center, and every time you pull on the flap, you leave it with a flattened edge. So you will always have a flat edge to grasp. And now while coming towards the end of the rhexis, you try to close it from out to in and not from in to out. If you leave end it from out to in, you will not have an area of weakness at the end. So you leave it from out to in. So this is how you do a capsular rhexis. The next step is hydro procedures. Now these consist of two separate steps, hydrodissection and hydrodelineation. We'll deal with it separately. Now hydrodissection is very different from hydrodelineation. It's a single shot procedure which is to be done in a single plane. And what is this plane? This plane is the plane which exists between the anterior capsule and rest of the lens matter. So you have a very nicely demarcated plane to attack. You inject the fluid against the capsule and not into the cortex for this step. So because you have a single plane to go in, you literally have one good chance to do it. If you manage to sort of disturb the cortical fibers in this step and not get a good hydrodissection, you will probably not have a good hydrodissection at all. And finally, once you have injected the fluid in this plane, you depress the nucleus to decompress the lens as some fluid gets collected behind the lens. So this is in real time. First you depress and you leave the OVD, and then you inject the fluid below the capsule and you get the hydrodissection wave going. But again, we'll see it in slow motion to see all the small steps involved in this part. So the first is to depress. Remember, there is OVD in the anterior chamber. So you depress the main port, release some OVD, so it will decompress the anterior chamber, give some space in it for the fluid to go in the eye. Then you advance your BSS cannula into the anterior chamber, and your idea should be to go either on this side or on this side, never on these sides, because if you put your cannula here, your entire lens is free from pressure from the needle. So when you inject the fluid, it has free access to go inside the plane. So you advance it towards the capsular rhexis edge. At this point, you should physically feel the capsule lifting up against the BSS cannula. When you do this, you'll find that you are in the correct plane, and at this point you point the BSS cannula against the undersurface of the capsule, and this is where you inject, not into the cortex, against the undersurface of the anterior capsule. And once you start injecting, don't stop. You'll see a wave forming, as in this case. Keep going till the wave ends at the other end. Don't stop in between, because if you stop in between, you'll lose the plane and the hydrodissection won't be complete. And then the final step, you depress the nucleus. It will release some of the fluid which is accumulated at the back and allow you to go to the next step, which is hydrodelineation. So hydrodelineation, unlike hydrodissection, is to be done in multiple planes. You are looking to create separation amongst various layers of the cortex and the epinucleus and the nucleus. The more fluid you put in, the more layers you create, the safer would be phacoemulsification. The smaller the nucleus would become. It will give you a very good layer of cortex, epicortex and epinucleus behind the nucleus, so you will keep the posterior capsule safe. So the idea is to get multiple golden rings if you have done a good hydrodelineation. So let's see this in real time. So unlike hydrodissection, which I showed in the previous video, the fluid is injected now downwards, and as this has to be done in multiple planes, you don't know, there is no fixed landmark like the anterior capsule. So you have to just go inside the cortex and keep varying the depth of the BSS cannula and keep injecting gently, And you'll find that as you vary the depth, the fluid will keep going in different planes and creating different planes of separation. And you see multiple golden rings forming. And once you do that, you try to rotate the nucleus and you can proceed to the next stage. Now, why is this important? Both these steps, hydrodissection and hydrodelineation, serve one important purpose, that is to disrupt the connection between the lens, capsule, and the zonules. Once you have a nucleus which is freely rotating in the capsular bag, any movements which you put on any force which you put on the nucleus won't get transmitted that well to the capsule and in fact to the zonules. If you proceed without movement of the nucleus, whenever you try to chop or move or rotate this nucleus, these forces will get transmitted to the zonules, which in turn can cause a zonular dialysis during nucleotomy. So let's just see this in slow motion. So you see if you remember hydrodissection, the needle was in single plane, it was not moving at all during injection. But in hydrodelineation, the direction is little downwards and outwards, and I'm always moving the needle. I'm injecting and moving at the same time, so to ensure that the fluid is going in multiple planes, creating multiple areas of separation and leading to formation of multiple golden rings, which tells me that I have done a good hydrodelineation in multiple planes. Now we come to the part which actually I think is a little more difficult to teach and learn, because it constitutes not only, now you are going to be interacting with the machine. Till this point you are doing everything with basic instruments. Now the machine will also come into play. You will encounter 4 grades of nuclei in your practice. 80% of your cases which you will do fall into grade 2 to 3. So the basic techniques of nucleotomy will pertain to grade 2 and 3. However, grade 4 and grade 1 require little different strategies, which I'll discuss after I discuss the basic techniques of nucleotomy. Now here I'd like to give a small primer of the machine settings. Now all people who are from outside, they might be using different brands of machines. Now the thing to understand is that the brands may be different, the names which they use for each setting may be different, but there are 4 basic parameters. If you learn, if you master them, if you know what they do, you can do a case very well on each machine. So the first setting is the IOP, or the bottle height. So in the machine which I use, the Centurion, it directly sets the IOP and gives you an equivalent bottle height. In other machines, you generally have a bottle height setting. Now what this does, it maintains the anterior chamber. So if you have set it at a particular level, and in the case you find that the anterior chamber is becoming shallow, you can increase this setting. If you find that the anterior chamber is too deep, you can decrease this setting. So what you have to do is you have to create a baseline level of each setting before you proceed for any case. And my recommendation is that this baseline setting should be same in all cases when you begin. And as you start your case with the machine, you see what is happening. And if you have a good understanding of what each parameter does, you can tweak these settings during your case to improve the response of the machine. So in a Centurion, for example, I normally use bottle height which is around 60 to 65, which gives an equivalent bottle height of something between 80 to 90 centimeters. The second setting is the vacuum, measured in millimeters of mercury. What it does is it attracts the nucleus or the lens matter towards the phaco needle and keeps it that way. This can be kept in this machine starting from 150 to around 380. So if you find that the nucleus is coming very fast towards the needle, you can decrease it. If you find that it is going through and through, even with little bit vacuum, you can decrease this setting. The third setting is the aspiration flow rate, which is the amount of fluid which is evacuated from the eye per minute. What does it translate to? When you are doing phaco, it determines the speed at which the nuclear material is evacuated from the eye after it has been emulsified. So how do you use this setting? If you find that if there is too much turbulence in the anterior chamber while you are trying to do phacoemulsification, if the pieces are coming very fast, then you can decrease this setting. If you find that the pieces are not coming, they are staying in the periphery, you are having to chase them, it means the aspiration flow rate is less. At that point, you can increase it. There is also a component of association between these two values, the vacuum and the aspiration flow rate. This needs to be somewhere around 10% of the vacuum. The final setting is the par setting. So I'll not go into details of the longitudinal and torsional phaco. Normally we use torsional phaco in most cases. The important thing to know here is that this gets activated when you are position 3 of the foot switch, and you should normally try to keep this at a linear control, which means that when you enter position, for example, if you see in this chart, it says it 10 to 60 and it shows a line which goes at an angle, which means that I will have a linear control over the torsional par when I go into position 3. So when I go into position 3 of the foot switch, as the baseline is set at 10, it will immediately begin with 10% of the maximum par at the beginning of the position 3. And when I go towards the end of the position 3, it will slowly go till 60% of the par. Now, how do you use it? You keep your own baseline, say 0 to 50 or 0 to 60 or 10 to 60. And then if you find that the needle is going through and through very fast through the nucleus, it means that you have kept the setting very high, the nucleus is soft. So you can decrease the upper limit from 60 to say 40%. If you find that even if you go through and through your the foot switch position 3 and still you are not able to go through the nucleus, it means that the nucleus is harder than you thought and the 60% is not enough. Then you can increase it to 80 or 90%. This is how you use 4 settings. More than the absolute numbers, it's your baseline level which is going to matter. Have your own baseline. Ensure before every case that your baseline is set on the machine, and then begin your case. And then whenever you encounter any problems, you lower or increase the settings as required, depending on which aspect of the surgery is bothering you. Now there are 3 steps. See, 3. So normally now I teach direct chopping only, in which you just use a sharp chopper to chop nucleus into smaller pieces. The goal of nucleotomy is to divide the nucleus into small pieces, each of which can be individually removed with the help of a phaco probe. So there is a series of steps which I say which have to be used every time you chop. That is vacuum, phaco, and vacuum. What are these? These have to be done in this order. So you grasp the nucleus with vacuum, which is position 2. Once the nucleus is attached to the tip of the phaco needle, at that point you initiate phaco with position 3, and you will find that the phaco needle starts to get into the nucleus. You keep going till you reach the end of the sleeve, and then at that point you stop giving phaco but come back to position 2. Now the third sub step, which is coming back to vacuum, is most critical because this will hold the nucleus. This will keep the phaco probe impaled in the nucleus, but keep it attached to the phaco needle, which is the impalement. And once you have impaled the nucleus and held it with vacuum, and then you apply the chopper to crack it. So we'll see this in detail. So you'll have to see multiple things in this. So this is the vacuum setting, which will show that how much vacuum is being applied, and this is the phaco setting. So this is one of the older machines. So you see the first step in chopping is to give vacuum. So there is no phaco here, you are just giving vacuum. And when you give vacuum, you'll find that some cortex gets aspirated, but once the needle hits the nucleus, it will stop to go further because the nucleus is hard, and just with vacuum we cannot go inside, and then it will show occlusion. At this point you initiate phaco and you will find emulsion forming, and then you keep going till you have a good hold on the nucleus. Once you find that the needle has gone into the nucleus, at that point again you see the phaco par has become 0, but the vacuum is still there. So you gave vacuum first, you gave phaco to impale the needle, and then you have stopped at vacuum again, and you keep your foot switch at position 2 to keep it on vacuum. Then the nucleus will remain attached to the needle, and then you can just give counter pressure or cutting movement with the sharp chopper placed right in front of the needle to crack it. So you see, you never let go of the the nucleus with the phaco needle, and your aim is to, for a grade 2 to 3 nucleus, your aim is to cut through and through till the bottom of the nucleus, and then you just keep rotating the nucleus and repeating the same movement, vacuum, phaco, and vacuum all around. And once the pieces are smaller, you can remove them. The other thing to note is the position of the phaco needle always remain in the center. Don't go to the periphery. The more peripheral you go, the closer you will be to the posterior capsule, the closer you will be to the endothelium. Now, in this particular segment, I'll also be showing some videos from the residents which we have reviewed over the years, because I think in this step it looks easier if when you see someone experienced operating, but when you actually do your own case, you encounter a lot of difficulties. So in this particular segment, I'll show you a couple of videos of very common errors which we see. So in this first case, we find that the initial tendency is to chase the nucleus with the vacuum, with the phaco needle, and not giving vacuum at all. So you'll find that beginners a lot of times chase the nucleus, they don't give vacuum at all, and they reach the periphery. And you don't want to do that. You don't want to push the nucleus into extreme periphery. You can cause a dialysis, you can cause damage to the rhexis margin, and you don't want to be doing this peripheral chopping at all. You want to stay in the center. You want to use the vacuum properly. Now this is another example where so in this the impalement is not being done properly. Only the vacuum is used, and because there is no phaco which is being given, as soon as the chopping is tried, the nucleus goes off from the needle, and you don't get any chopping motions again. So you see just the vacuum being given, that too in the periphery. The nucleus is brought anteriorly with the vacuum only. No phaco has been given because you didn't see any emulsion forming. And when you try to do chopping in this case, the needle will come off because it's not impaled in the nucleus with the help of phaco energy. So again, an example of peripheral chopping, you want to stay in the center. Lastly, this is a very common thing which I see. The role of the chopper is to crack the nucleus. It's not to feed the nucleus particles into the phaco needle. If you do this, there are multiple things which can go wrong. You can damage the endothelium. You can also damage the steel, the tip of the phaco needle, which causes a lot of chipping of the metal from the phaco needle, and this metal can get deposited all over the eye. So once the chopping is done, you keep the chopper away. At best, you can use the chopper to direct the nucleus towards the phaco needle while staying away from the phaco needle, but avoid the tendency to manually break the nucleus into small pieces and trying to feed it through the chopper at all. So this is to be avoided. Now, the grade 4 nucleus, grade 4 or grade 4 plus nucleus, it's little different than a grade 2 to 3 in the sense that the nucleus is much bigger. It extends both in the lateral direction and the anterior posterior direction. So the depth of the hardness is much more. So when you crack, you will in most cases you will not get a crack which is deep enough. So you need to treat the center of the nucleus, which is the hardest part, differently than the periphery. So your aim is to get rid of this central part as soon as possible. So this can be done by two methods. The initial described technique was a crater and chop, where you ran phaco without any attempt to chopping in the center, created a central crater, and then do the peripheral chopping. Nowadays we do what is called a peripheral chopping, followed by mid-peripheral chopping, followed by the separation of the central core of the nucleus. You remove that central core, and then you remove the nucleus. So you'll see that. So it's not exactly in the periphery, that is to be avoided. You do the chopping in the mid-periphery area, which is somewhere before the capsular rhexis margin, and you give chops which are peripheral. So they will not come to the center, they will just be peripheral, and you give multiple chops, and as you give multiple chops, you will find that the center of the hard nucleus will get separated on its own. So these are mid-peripheral chops. Once you give them, you will find that the center core gets separated. You remove that, and then you can proceed all along the hard nucleus. Now, grade 1 cataracts are those which are softer than grade 2, but they are not. You cannot do phacoaspiration with them, and at the same time, you cannot mostly chop them. So, what to do? You need a good hydrodelineation in grade 1. If you have a good hydrodelineation going in grade 1 nuclei, you will always be able to remove them very easily, because the nucleus is very small, it's soft and small, and it can normally it comes in one piece. If it doesn't, and so how do you know that it's a grade 1 and it's not chopping? You'll find that despite reducing all settings and everything, whenever you try to give a chopping motion, it goes through and through. So a very easy method is to inject some methyl cellulose as if you are doing hydrodelineation. This lifts up the edge of the nucleus and creates some space with the viscoelastic, and you go with the phaco probe in the off position. You position it below the edge of the nucleus, and then you use the phaco to remove the entire nucleus. So this is one of the safe techniques which I employ in managing grade 1 nuclei. These are the nuclei which are harder than the younger pediatric cataract, which can be removed with phacoaspiration, but at the same time they cannot be chopped. Now, coming to cortical aspiration, at this point I find that if you have gotten through these steps, I find that the surgeons start to relax, and in fact the steps are relatively easier, but this is the time where most of the complications occur, most of the PCTS occurs. So you use a coaxial IA probe to do this. A few tips: keep the aspiration port facing towards you at all times. Try to hold the anterior lamellae of the cortex. What you are doing is you are trying to peel the lamellae towards the center of the capsular bag. If you ever catch the posterior lamellae, leave them and try to hold only the anterior lamellae of the cortex, and give a peeling motion to peel them, bring them towards the center after peeling, and then aspirate them. And go contiguously all around without leaving any orphan cortical fibers. If you leave skip areas, then you will find that it's difficult to fish for them after you have done that. So we'll see all these steps of cortical aspiration in this. Just remember that I recommend that you start from this area, the area which is below the side port. And the reason I would make it clear in the next couple of slides, but just remember here that take care of this area first, and then you will be much secure. So keep the aspiration port towards you as far as possible, and then grasp the anterior lamellae. Once you do that, remember you are in position 2, you are in phacoaspiration settings. At position 2, you are giving vacuum. If it starts, once you have had a good hold on the anterior lamellae, peel them. Peel the fibers till they get peeled towards the center. Once they are peeled towards the center, at this point, increase the vacuum so that they get aspirated. And go contiguously. You can go both clockwise and you can go anterior clockwise, whatever you prefer, but go contiguously. Don't leave any skip areas. Again, keep the aspiration ports towards you, peel them towards the center. Don't try to aspirate them in the periphery. So you see, I'll keep repeating it. Hold the anterior lamellae, peel it towards the center. Once you reach the center, begin them. Once you reach this subincisional area, you will find that sometimes the anterior chamber starts to become shallow. At this point, you need to exercise more caution. Make sure that there is the tube is not pinched inordinately, so as to provide enough fluid in the eye. Now, If you ever get left with some residual cortical matter, especially in the subincisional area, you can use a technique which is called the hybrid bimanual. Now, in this, you combine the advantages of a bimanual system with a coaxial system. The major drawback of a bimanual system is that when you leave the main port open during this, if you use a regular bimanual, which tends to leak very badly, and sometimes you get a very flat anterior chamber. So if you use a hybrid bimanual, you basically use the coaxial IA probe, which is connected only to the irrigation tubing into the anterior chamber. So your main port gets secured with the coaxial IA, and then you use only the aspiration handpiece of the bimanual system through the side port. Now, if you remember, I said that take care of this area first. Why do I say this? Because this is the only area, the sub side port area, which cannot be handled effectively with the hybrid bimanual technique. So if you have taken out the fibers from this area, then the rest of the 300 degrees or so you can effectively manage with hybrid bimanual. So you use a regular coaxial probe for irrigation. There is a slight difference in the technique as compared to coaxial. Here you need to set up the sleeve little differently. So we'll see this in slow motion. So now you don't need the aspiration port in this technique of this probe. So you advance the sleeve by giving it, by rotating it, and you eventually come to this position where you have the sleeve which is extending beyond the metal edge. So this will give you two benefits. One, your aspiration port gets occluded. Your metal tip is safely protected by the edge of the silicone sleeve. And thirdly, you can keep the entire probe at the very tip of the main port, because this is the part which is going to be letting off fluid. So you can have very good visualization in the subincisional area. So now we'll see this in real time and the technique. So this is the sleeve setup. You introduce this in the anterior chamber. Now you see because you are using the coaxial probe, the fluid is going very nicely. It will keep the anterior chamber very deep compared to the regular bimanual, and yeah. So then you introduce the aspiration port, the aspiration probe of the bimanual system, and then you can go all along to remove any remaining cortical fibers very nicely. You can position this as per your requirement, as per the area which you want to do with the aspiration cannula. So use the hybrid bimanual wherever you want. Now coming to IOL implantation, there are very discrete steps in this. You have to inject viscoelastic into the capsular bag to inflate it. Then you dock the cartridge, and then you inject the IOL into the capsular bag. These are the three steps. The thing to be learnt in this is that it is a two-handed operation. If I'm talking about a right-handed person, so your dominant hand is doing two things. It's injecting the IOL and it is keeping the cartridge aligned with the incision. That's the job of the right hand. And the left hand, on the other hand, is doing two things. One is it does the initial docking. The dominant hand is doing the alignment. This is doing the initial docking, and you are using the forefinger of the hand to. So just compare this left video with this photograph. So this is the non-dominant hand. So it is doing two things. It aligns it keeps the cartridge aligned. Okay. And at the same time, this forefinger is pressed on the plunger so that you can actually regulate the pressure on the injection process, and the right hand is injecting. This is of course valid for the times when you are using a manual injection system. If you have an AutoCert, then the left hand, the alignment, the injection part is not required. So you can use actually the left hand for other things, including the stabilization of the globe. So again, this process, this looks easier when you see experienced people doing it, but there are a lot of mistakes which we see happening. So what are the common ones? The first is that there is usually, I see an over injection of the OVD. How does it look like? It looks like what is being done. So you see excessive spillage of OVD. So you want an optimal fill. You don't want this. What will it do? It unnecessarily increases the pressure in the eye. It increases the pressure in the anterior chamber. So when you try to inject the IOL in a closed system which already is overfilled with OVD, you will never have a good injection because it will give you a lot of pushback on the IOL. So what's the optimal fill? So you advance the cannula gently into the eye. You first inject a little bit of OVD here to keep the iris away, push back the posterior capsule if it is coming anteriorly, and then you start to inject in the center and pointing the tip of the needle in various directions. What you will see is once the bag starts filling, the rhexis margin will start to expand, and you keep injecting till the margin keeps expanding. Once this expansion becomes static, and at the first sign of spillage of the OVD from the eye, you stop. So as soon as you see that the OVD is starting to spill out, you stop. So this is the optimal fill of the OVD. Okay, so this also is an interesting video. So you see in this case the person has injected the cartridge into the eye. So I don't mind if someone uses this technique because this takes away the docking problems and the alignment problems, the incision out of the equation. So you can just comfortably inject. So in your learning curve, this is not a bad technique to use. But you'll find that even with this, the person is really struggling to inject the IOL into the bag. So what is the reason for this? You'll find, if you have observed carefully, let us see this once till the end and then we'll take it again. So one might be thinking that there is a problem in the injector or something, but eventually it will go in. So the error which happened in this case was that the IOL was too far out in the cartridge. So the IOL needed to be here at the tip of the cartridge, but the IOL was right behind at the very back of the cartridge, and this entire cartridge is filled with viscoelastic. So you go into an eye which is already pressurized with viscoelastic, you start to inject the IOL, but what you are essentially injecting is a lot of viscoelastic into the eye. You can see viscoelastic going into the eye, and it is further pressurizing the globe. And the IOL is nowhere to be seen. It needed to be here while it's still stuck there. So as you keep injecting, the anterior chamber gets further and further pressurized, and there is no possibility of the lens to go in until the viscoelastic comes out. So it will come out from either here or from the side port like a pressure valve, and once that comes out, only then the lens goes in. You see the lens is starting to come now, and the viscoelastic will come out from both the sides, and that is the point where the lens comes in. So what's the correct way to do this? You bring the cartridge into view under the microscope, and you depress the plunger slowly until you reach this point. Now this point is where the lens is. So this normally the cartridge has a bevel tip, so there is a longer area and the shorter area. So you want the lens to stop just before the shorter edge of the tip, shorter edge of the cartridge bevel, and then you dock it with the incision and then inject. So this gives, so the advantage is that A, you have not injected anything extra into the eye. B, the time taken to inject is much less because you are straight away going into the injection of the IOL. So the chances of losing the docking during injection of the IOL become less and less. Now we come to the final step of the surgery. The incision is closed by hydration of all the incisions, and the fluid is injected into the stroma, and always the cannula is positioned tangentially along the limbus. But now I'd like to put a rider here. Your aim when you start the surgery is to leave the patient sutureless, but especially during this step, leave your ego at the back If you find that the incision is leaky at all, bit leaky, don't hesitate to put a single suture at the end of this procedure. So the method is that you inject fluid into the corneal stroma in a tangential position. You could be even a little more tangential than this clip, and you keep creating this whiteness, which shows you the hydration, and you do it till it reaches half of the incision on one side. Once you have done that, you position the cannula reverse, go tangentially into the stroma, and you keep injecting till these two white regions meet. At this point, you have hydrated the incision. Now you go to the side port, do the same thing, keeping it tangentially and doing it from both sides, and you have hydrated the wound. So the trick is to always do the main port first and do the side port in the end, because the main port is the one which is going to trouble you the most. Now, so here you have to titrate the pressure of the fluid which you are injecting, because if you apply too much pressure, you can find that you can inject it forcefully into the anterior chamber, and you can prolapse the iris even through a 2.2. So always give a very smooth movement on the plunger to inject it into the corneal stroma. Make sure you are not injecting in the eye. You can also use this test, which I recommend, that if you at the end of the surgery, if you find that the wound is leaky or the eye is little soft, you can inject an air bubble which is around 50 to 75% of the diameter of the cornea, and if it increases in size considerably, it means that the incision is leaky. It could be either of the two. So you hydrate the ports till the point your bubble becomes stable. When your bubble becomes stable, you are sure that it will increase little bit in the beginning, but it will stabilize. Yeah. So your goal is to achieve a bubble which stops increasing in size. If you achieve that, you will find that your incisions are sealed. Yeah. So this is what you want to achieve. You want to achieve a bubble which is stable. This is around 50% depth, 50% of the diameter. If it is very large, what you will have is basically the air closing the wounds, which you don't want. You don't want an airtight wound. You want a watertight wound. So it should be, and if it is too small, it will not be of any use. So you want it to be around 50% of the diameter, and once you achieve a stable bubble, you can leave the patient. And that brings us to the end. So I'll summarize the approach here. So in the learning curve, one has to be patient and thoughtful. Focus on the technique. Speed will come, it will come later, but in the beginning, just focus on the technique. You have to keep the patient's interest paramount. You will get another case, you will get another opportunity, but if you find in your learning curve that you are having a problem, don't be afraid to hand over the case to a senior, because the patient's interest has to be kept paramount. Video record all cases wherever possible. Do a thorough analysis of your videos. You have to, it's a tedious job, but if you compare each step, you have to compare each movement where you went wrong, and then you are going to really improve. And this is one request, that once you learn a surgery, I think it's best to teach someone. I mean, I feel that it's not a favor that we do, it's a debt that from our teachers that we repay. And on that philosophical note, I'll come to the end of this lecture, and thank you very much all for attending.